The sun had barely risen over Louisville, Kentucky, when Cassius Clay stood on the cracked sidewalk outside his family's modest home. The summer air already pressed heavy on his skin, thick with the humidity of the South. He was dressed in a clean but simple shirt and slacks, his suitcase sitting at his feet, stuffed to bursting with the few belongings he owned. A pair of shoes worn thin from endless road work, some neatly folded shirts, a Bible, and a small notebook where he scribbled ideas and promises to himself. The neighborhood was awake early that morning. People knew he was leaving. Word had spread fast through the streets. Cassius Clay, the Louisville kid with fists like lightning, was headed to the Olympics, the pride of the West End. Children darted up and down the street, waving, some calling his name. Old men leaned on porches, nodding in approval. Women whispered about how handsome he looked, how far he was bound to go. And Cassius grinned, because he was never one to miss a chance to bask in admiration. He raised his chin, flashing that wide, mischievous smile. "Don't worry, y'all. I'll be back with gold around my neck. You'll see Cassius Clay on top of the world." They laughed and clapped, shouting blessings as he picked up his suitcase. But behind the grin, his chest was tight. Behind the bravado, a shadow gnawed at him. Because today, he wasn't just fighting boxers. He was fighting the sky itself. Cassius hated flying. The very thought of it made his stomach twist into knots. He could stand in a ring face to face with a boy who wanted to knock his head off and feel nothing but thrill. But the idea of sitting strapped into a metal tube, soaring thousands of feet above the ground, that was madness. "Man wasn't made to fly," he muttered under his breath as he glanced up at the pale morning sky. "If God wanted us in the air, he'd have given us wings." His brother Rudy sat on the porch steps watching him pace. Rudy was younger, smaller, but he shared that same spark of mischief in his eyes. "You keep stomping like that, Cass, you gonna wear a hole straight through the earth."
Cassius shot him a look. "Don't you start with me, Rudy. You ever been on a plane?" Rudy shook his head. "Nope." "Then don't tell me it ain't scary. Cars break down, you pull over. Planes break down, you fall out the sky. Ain't nothing to laugh at." Rudy chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You box like you ain't afraid of nobody. But one little airplane?" Cassius cut him off with a wave. "Ain't little, it's big, too heavy to be floating in the air." Rudy just smirked, but Cassius couldn't laugh with him. His palms were already damp, and the sound of an engine far in the distance made his pulse quicken. He wasn't exaggerating. He was truly afraid. When the yellow taxi pulled up in front of the house, Cassius's stomach dropped further. The driver leaned out the window, tipping his cap. He was a middle-aged black man with graying temples and steady, wise eyes. His cab smelled faintly of tobacco and leather, the seats worn and cracked, but clean. "Airport?" the driver asked. Cassius hesitated, suitcase clutched tight in his hand. The word itself sent a chill down his spine. "Yeah," he muttered. "Airport." Rudy slapped him on the back, grinning. "Bring home that medal, Cass." Cassius forced a smile, but his throat felt dry. He climbed into the back seat, setting the suitcase on his lap like a shield. The cab rumbled forward, tires crunching on gravel, and the houses of his neighborhood slipped away behind him. Louisville rolled past the window, brick houses, narrow sidewalks, children playing ball in the streets, shopkeepers opening their stores. The city was alive, familiar, grounding. Cassius pressed his forehead against the glass, as if the sight of home could anchor him against what was coming. "You nervous?" the driver asked, casually, eyes on the road. Cassius sat up straight, offended. "Me? Nervous? Nah, man. I don't get nervous. I'm Cassius Clay, fast as fists in Louisville, soon to be fast as fists in Rome." The driver chuckled, his voice low and warm. "You talking fast, son, but your hand's shaking. You ain't nervous about fighting. You nervous about flying, ain't you?" Cassius froze, staring at his trembling fingers. He curled them into fists quickly, hiding the shake. I ain't scared of no man, but flying, man, that ain't natural. The driver hummed thoughtfully. Ain't natural, maybe, but sometimes a man's gotta do what feels unnatural to reach something bigger. Fear's just another opponent. You face it, or it beats you. Cassius leaned forward desperately. You ever been on a plane?
Once, the driver said simply. Cassius's eyes widened. And you lived? The man laughed so hard he slapped the steering wheel. Course I lived. Here I am, ain't I? Cassius frowned, slumping back against the seat. Still don't like it. They expect me to sit there like it ain't dangerous. I'm telling you, people ain't meant to fly. The driver glanced at him in the mirror, his eyes kind but firm. Tell you what, son, you go to Rome, you fight, you win. And when you come back, you find me. You tell me how it was. You give me that promise, and I'll believe you're as brave as you say. Cassius blinked, startled. A promise. His pride stirred. He was many things, but he wasn't a liar, and he wasn't a man to break his word. A promise gave him something to hold on to, a reason to stand tall when fear tried to bend him. Slowly, he nodded. All right, I'll do it. I promise you, when I win that gold, I'll come back and I'll find you. The driver's eyes softened. That's the spirit. A man's only as good as his word. The cab rattled on, drawing closer to the airport. Cassius's chest still tightened with every passing mile, his imagination still conjuring images of engines failing, of metal wings folding. But now, there was something else beneath the fear. A thread of determination. A fire. He clenched his fists in his lap, whispering to himself, I made a promise. Cassius Clay don't break promises. By the time the cab pulled up to the airport, the fear was still there, gnawing, sharp. But he stepped out anyway. He straightened his shoulders, lifted his chin, and carried his suitcase with purpose. The promise carried him forward, each step a small victory over the dread that tried to hold him back. As the driver pulled away, Cassius glanced back one last time. Their eyes met in the rearview mirror, and the man tipped his hat. And Cassius knew, deep down, that this was more than a ride to the airport. This was the first test, the first opponent to beat. The cab ride was the beginning of his destiny. Once, the driver said simply. Cassius's eyes widened. And you lived? The man laughed so hard he slapped the steering wheel. Course I lived. Here I am, ain't I? Cassius frowned, slumping back against the seat. Still don't like it. They expect me to sit there like it ain't dangerous. I'm telling you, people ain't meant to fly. The driver glanced at him in the mirror, his eyes kind but firm. Tell you what, son, you go to Rome, you fight, you win. And when you come back, you find me. You tell me how it was. You give me that promise, and I'll believe you're as brave as you say. Cassius blinked, startled. A promise. His pride stirred. He was many things, but he wasn't a liar, and he wasn't a man to break his word. A promise gave him something to hold on to, a reason to stand tall when fear tried to bend him. Slowly, he nodded. All right, I'll do it. I promise you, when I win that gold, I'll come back and I'll find you. The driver's eyes softened. That's the spirit. A man's only as good as his word. The cab rattled on, drawing closer to the airport. Cassius's chest still tightened with every passing mile, his imagination still conjuring images of engines failing, of metal wings folding. But now, there was something else beneath the fear. A thread of determination. A fire. He clenched his fists in his lap, whispering to himself, I made a promise. Cassius Clay don't break promises. By the time the cab pulled up to the airport, the fear was still there, gnawing, sharp. But he stepped out anyway. He straightened his shoulders, lifted his chin, and carried his suitcase with purpose. The promise carried him forward, each step a small victory over the dread that tried to hold him back.
As the driver pulled away, Cassius glanced back one last time. Their eyes met in the rearview mirror, and the man tipped his hat. And Cassius knew, deep down, that this was more than a ride to the airport. This was the first test, the first opponent to beat. The cab ride was the beginning of his destiny.
The airplane roared down the runway, the engine screaming like chained beasts desperate for release. Cassius Clay gripped the armrest so tight his knuckles turned bone white. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his heart hammered louder than any boxing crowd he had ever heard. He had never prayed harder in his life than in that moment, his lips moving silently, begging God to keep the wings steady, the engine strong. As the ground fell away, as Louisville shrank beneath him, a boy who had never left his hometown felt the first pull of destiny. The earth was gone. The sky had him now. "Breathe, Cassius," he whispered to himself, eyes squeezed shut. "Just breathe. You made a promise." The words of the taxi driver echoed in his head like a bell. A man's only as good as his word. And so, though terror dug claws into his chest, Cassius sat upright, determined not to disgrace himself. If he could survive this, he could survive anything. The flight was long, grueling, filled with the endless hum of engines and the occasional shudder that rattled the boy to his core. But then, after what felt like an eternity, the descent began. Through the small oval window, Cassius saw a world unlike anything he had ever imagined. Rome, the eternal city. The domes and spires of ancient churches pierced the skyline. Sunlight bathed marble ruins in a golden glow. Streets wound like veins through a living museum where history itself seemed to breathe. Cassius pressed his face to the glass, his fear giving way to wonder. Man, this ain't Louisville no more. The Olympic Village buzzed with energy, alive with athletes from every corner of the world. Men and women with lean, powerful bodies jogged along paths, stretched in the grass, conversed in dozens of different languages. Flags from nations Cassius had never heard of fluttered in the warm Roman air. And everywhere, the eyes of the world seemed to burn with ambition. Cassius strutted through the village with his suitcase bouncing against his leg, head high, smile flashing. He made sure everyone noticed him. He cracked jokes, boasted about his speed, his footwork, his destiny. "I'm Cassius Clay from Louisville, Kentucky. You may not know me now, but you will. I'm so fast I can turn off the light and be in bed before the room goes dark." The boxers laughed, some shaking their heads, others sizing him up. But Cassius didn't care. Let them doubt him. Let them smirk. He thrived on it. He was not just another fighter. He was a storm waiting to break. When the time for his first bout arrived, he walked into the arena with his head high, the weight of the promise in his chest. The crowd was immense, a sea of faces roaring in languages he didn't understand. The ring looked the same as it always had. Ropes, canvas, corners, but the energy was different. This was not just another fight in a small Kentucky gym. This was the world stage. His opponent was a European, strong and confident, with a jaw like granite and fists like hammers. But Cassius wasn't fazed. He danced, he floated. His feet barely touched the canvas. His hands snapped out like vipers. The crowd gasped at his speed, the way he slipped punches as if he could see the future. Round after round he dazzled them, and when his hand was raised, when the referee shouted his name, he felt the fire inside blaze higher. One fight down, more to go. The days blurred into a rhythm of training, fighting, and resting. Each opponent was tougher than the last, each one determined to crush the loud American boy with the wide grin. But Cassius was untouchable. He ducked, weaved, jabbed, and moved with the rhythm of jazz. His fists sang a song of defiance, a melody of speed and grace. And the world began to notice. Newspapers scribbled his name, broadcasters marveled at his style. Even opponents whispered that the kid from Louisville was something different, something special. But through every cheer, every victory, Cassius's thoughts always circled back to the cab driver. The man's steady eyes, his quiet wisdom. A man's only as good as his word. It became a mantra, a rhythm that drove him harder, pushed him deeper into training, steadied him when doubt tried to creep in. He wasn't just fighting for a medal, he was fighting for his promise. The final bout arrived on a sunlit afternoon. The arena throbbed with anticipation, thousands crammed into the stands. The opponent across the ring was no ordinary fighter. He was strong, seasoned, with arms like tree trunks and the kind of power that could break men in half. But Cassius stood in his corner, bouncing lightly, his robe draped over his shoulders. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with fire. He remembered the cracked leather of the cab seat, the tobacco scent, the driver's voice. "Win or lose," Cassius whispered, "I keep my word." The bell rang. The fight was a storm. His opponent came forward like a bull, swinging heavy shots meant to crush. But Cassius was the matador. He danced, spun, leaned just inches away from destruction, and answered with lightning jabs that snapped heads back. The crowd roared, wave after wave of sound crashing against the ring. Round after round the storm raged. Sweat flew like rain, gloves thudded like thunder. Cassius's lungs burned, his legs ached, but he refused to break. He moved like a shadow, hit like a spark. And in the final round, with the world watching, Cassius unleashed a flurry of punches so fast the crowd could barely follow. His opponent staggered, overwhelmed. The bell rang. Silence. Then the referee's hand lifted Cassius's arm high. The crowd erupted. Cassius Clay was Olympic champion. Gold glinted around his neck, heavy and warm. Tears stung his eyes as he raised it high, grinning through the exhaustion. He had done it. He had beaten fear. He had beaten men from across the world. He had proven himself. But more than that, he had kept his promise. That night, as the Olympic Village buzzed with celebration, Cassius sat alone for a while, staring at the medal in his hands. He thought of home, of Louisville, of the cab driver who had believed in him enough to demand his word. And Cassius smiled. "I'll be back," he whispered. "I'll find you. I don't forget." The promise carried him across the ocean, heavier and stronger than the medal around his neck. And when the plane took off to carry him home, Cassius no longer gripped the armrests in terror. He leaned back, eyes steady, heart calm. He was flying now not because of the plane, but because of the fire inside him. The fire of destiny.
The airplane touched down with a shudder, wheels screeching against the tarmac. Louisville sprawled out beneath the morning haze, a city Cassius Clay had never loved so much as he did in that moment. The fear of flight was gone, or at least buried under triumph. Around his neck, heavier than gold itself, the Olympic medal gleamed. When he stepped off the plane, the air smelled of home. Fried food wafting from corner diners, the musky scent of summer heat rising from asphalt, the sweet tang of honeysuckle clinging to fences. A small crowd had gathered at the airport. Reporters jostled with notebooks, flashing cameras popped. Family, neighbors, strangers, all eager to touch the boy who had left as Cassius Clay and returned as Olympic champion. "Cassius! Cassius!" voices shouted. "How's it feel? What's next for you? Show us the medal." He grinned, wide and radiant, lifting the medal high for all to see. Didn't I tell y'all? Didn't I say I was going to do it? Louisville, we got us a champion now." The crowd cheered, and Cassius soaked it in, every drop of admiration fueling him. But even in the noise, in the flashing lights and congratulatory hands, something tugged at him. The promise. That night, long after the celebrations had faded, Cassius sat alone on the porch of his family's modest home. The metal rested against his chest, warm from his skin. Crickets sang in the dark, and the hum of the city drifted through the sticky summer air. He thought of the cab driver, the man's calm eyes, his steady voice. A man's only as good as his word. Cassius had won the medal. Now he had to win something greater, the respect of his own soul. The next morning he set out. He asked around at the cab station, describing the driver, gray at the temples, middle-aged, kind eyes. The men at the stand nodded knowingly. "That sounds like Henry," one said. "Been driving cabs longer than most of us been alive. Good man, you'll find him." Cassius wandered through the streets until he spotted the familiar yellow cab parked beneath a sycamore tree. The driver leaned against the hood, cigarette in hand, watching the world pass. Cassius's heart leapt. He strode forward, metal gleaming in the sun. "Hey!" he called. "Remember me?" The driver looked up, eyes narrowing in surprise. Slowly a smile spread across his face. "Well, I'll be damned! The loudmouth boy who hated flying!" Cassius laughed, holding up the medal so it caught the light. "Told you I'd be back, told you I'd win, and here I am." The driver chuckled, shaking his head in wonder. "You kept your word. Not many men do that." Cassius stepped closer, his voice softer now, stripped of bravado. "You don't know what that promise meant to me. I was scared, more scared than I ever been in my life. But remembering what I told you, that's what carried me. Every round, every step, I thought, I can't quit. I made a promise." The driver's eyes glistened, though he tried to hide it with a shrug. "Sometimes all a man needs is someone to believe in him. Guess I gave you that." Cassius nodded, his grin shining, but this time it wasn't the grin of a boy showing off. It was the smile of a man who understood gratitude. "You gave me more than that. You gave me something to live up to."
The two of them sat on the curb beside the cab, talking as the city bustled around them. Cassius described Rome, the ancient ruins, the roaring crowds, the speed of the fights. The driver listened, nodding, laughing at the boy's wild energy. And when Cassius placed the medal in his hands, letting him feel its weight, the driver held it with reverence, as if it were a sacred thing. "You know what this means, son?" he asked quietly. Cassius tilted his head. "What?" "It means you can be more than just the fastest fists. You can be a man of your word. That's rarer than gold." The words sank deep, embedding themselves in Cassius's heart like seeds. One day, those seeds would grow into the man the world would know as Muhammad Ali, the man who stood not only as a boxer, but as a voice, a fighter for justice, a figure who never bowed to fear. But in that moment, on a summer day in Louisville, he was just Cassius Clay, a boy who made a promise and kept it. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, Cassius rose to his feet. He extended his hand, and the driver clasped it firmly. "Thank you," Cassius said. The driver nodded. "Go on, son. The world's waiting for you." Cassius turned, walking down the street, the metal glinting with each step. He was already dreaming of what lay ahead, the professional ring, the battles to come, the destiny calling his name. But deep inside, he knew the truth. Before the world, before the fame, before the glory, it all began with a cab ride, a fear of flying, and a promise. A promise that made him more than a fighter. A promise that made him a man.